Imagine a moment when the heavens tear apart and the earth trembles under the weight of divine presence. Picture a man who witnesses what mortals are not meant to see and hears, a voice capable of shaking the very foundations of the world. This man is the prophet Isaiah, and his story will forever change your understanding of the Bible. In ancient Jerusalem, when shadows of death shrouded the royal palace following the passing of King Uzziah, a young priest named Isaiah wandered through the city streets, observing the chaos and despair that had engulfed the people. 52 years of Uzziah's reign had brought prosperity and security, but now his death seemed to open the gates of uncertainty and fear. Isaiah came from an honored lineage, having grown up hearing tales of God's greatness and witnessing temple rituals since childhood. Yet now it seemed Jerusalem had lost its way. Corruption and idolatry had begun seeping into the very heart of the holy city. Nobles and priests who were meant to be examples of righteousness now sought only their own gain. The young prophet felt deeply troubled as he sat in a small chamber near the temple. The wind howled, slamming against the windows with force, as if warning of what was to come. He sensed that something was about to change drastically, though he couldn't say exactly what. His heart was restless, filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Suddenly, the door burst open, shattering the silence. "Brother Isaiah! Brother Isaiah!" shouted Jeremiah, his close friend, rushing in breathlessly. "Have you heard the news? The borders are under threat. The Assyrians are marching against us. They say with Uzziah dead, we are easy prey." Isaiah took a deep breath before answering, his voice heavy with concern. "And our people, Jeremiah? How are they reacting?" Jeremiah lowered his head, dejected, desperate, lost. Some speak of forming alliances with nations that worship other gods. Isaiah's expression grew even darker. "Jeremiah, our salvation does not lie in human alliances. We must return to the God of our fathers." Jeremiah looked deeply into Isaiah's eyes. "But who will listen in times like these? Who will hear your words?" Isaiah remained silent for a moment, gazing at the horizon where dark clouds began to gather. "Perhaps no one will hear me now, but someone must speak. Someone must remind our people who the true king is." Jeremiah nodded, moved by his friend's unwavering conviction. Later, walking toward the temple, Isaiah saw men arguing anxiously in the streets, and women weeping for their sons, who might soon be called to war. An elderly priest approached with a disheartened look. "Young Isaiah, do you truly believe God still hears us? Look around you. God has abandoned us." Isaiah replied calmly but firmly, "God would never abandon us. We are the ones who have turned away from him." The old man shook his head in disbelief and slowly walked away. Upon entering the temple, a heavy silence hung in the air, almost tangible. Isaiah approached the altar, knelt slowly, and began to pray. "God of our fathers, we are lost. Our nation is drifting from your law. Our hope is fading. Where else can we look but to you?" As he prayed, Isaiah felt a strong wind sweep through the temple, gently shaking the sacred veil. An indescribable presence began to fill the space, intense and overwhelming. A radiant light emerged from behind the veil, piercing through him with a brilliance too great to endure. Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. His body trembled uncontrollably. "O Lord," he cried with a trembling voice, "what am I seeing?" A voice resounded, deep and majestic. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Isaiah fell to the ground, unable to withstand the force of the vision, feeling completely unclean and unworthy. He cried out in despair, "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." A celestial being swiftly flew to the altar, taking a burning coal with tongs. Isaiah felt his heart pounding as the being approached with calm and mercy, reaching out the coal toward the young priest's lips. "Do not fear, Isaiah," the celestial being said in a gentle yet firm voice. "This coal has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away. Your sin is forgiven." The pain Isaiah felt was deep and burning, but liberating. Then the divine voice echoed again throughout the temple. "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" Isaiah slowly raised his head. Even knowing the trials he would face, he felt compelled to answer with resolve. He lifted his voice. "Here I am, Lord. Send me." Yet little did he know that what he saw in that temple would haunt him for the rest of his life. Isaiah remained kneeling on the cold temple floor, his heart racing, his mind in absolute turmoil. His lips still burned from the touch of the heavenly coal, but now a new reality unfolded before his eyes, one far beyond any human understanding. Everything around him seemed to vibrate. The ground, the walls, even the air itself, pulsed with an indescribable force. A light so intense appeared before him that Isaiah had to cover his eyes with his hands, unable to bear the blinding brightness. Through the gaps between his trembling fingers, he began to perceive extraordinary details. Before him stood a majestic throne, high and exalted, radiating a pure and penetrating light. Seated on the throne was the Lord, a vast, immeasurable figure whose face could not be beheld, so great was his glory. Around the throne, celestial beings with 6 wings flew continuously. Isaiah watched, both fascinated and terrified, as 2 wings covered their faces, 2 covered their feet, and with the other 2 they hovered in the air. A deep and powerful melody echoed throughout the temple, repeating without ceasing, "Holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The voice of these beings resonated deep within the prophet's soul, causing every fiber of his body to tremble. The entire temple seemed to quake under the intensity of that divine proclamation, while smoke began to fill the space, partially clouding his vision. Overwhelmed by fear, Isaiah began to murmur to himself, "How can I be here? This is too much for any man to bear." With every repetition of the celestial chant, his heart sank deeper into the painful awareness of his own impurity. It wasn't just fear. It was an overwhelming sense of shame in the face of divine perfection. He bowed his head, a tear slowly tracing down his cheek and falling onto the temple floor. "I am ruined," he whispered, trembling under the weight of that terrifying revelation. "I am unworthy of this. I do not deserve to witness such glory. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." Isaiah pressed his hands to his chest, trying to ease the suffocating weight pressing down on him. His breathing grew difficult, his body weakening under the magnitude of the vision. "Why have you brought me here, Lord?" he groaned, feeling completely unable to withstand such holiness. As he remained kneeling, the voice that echoed throughout the temple seemed to intensify even more. The young priest realized that the very foundations of the temple were trembling beneath the force of the celestial proclamation. Isaiah began to sob deeply, recognizing the gravity of his own condition before the perfect holiness that surrounded him. "There is no salvation for me here," he whispered desperately. "I am before the living God. No mortal can survive his presence." Suddenly, a shadow fell over Isaiah, interrupting his despairing thoughts. He slowly lifted his head and saw one of the seraphim swiftly approaching. His heart pounded, and fear overtook him, convinced that this moment would be his end. The celestial being held something in his hands. Isaiah tried to identify it, and his heart nearly stopped when he realized what it was. A burning coal taken directly from the heavenly altar. The searing glow of the ember seemed to light up the entire temple, casting dancing shadows on the smoke-filled walls. The celestial being came closer, his piercing eyes fixed on the trembling prophet. "No, Lord, I cannot bear this," Isaiah pleaded, trying in vain to retreat. The being landed gently before him, holding the glowing coal firmly in one hand. His eyes radiated calm and assurance. "Isaiah, said the celestial being with a deep and comforting voice. "This coal will touch your lips to purify you. Do not be afraid." Before Isaiah could react, he felt the searing heat of the coal touch his lips. The intense pain was mixed with an indescribable sense of relief and cleansing. He cried out, not from the physical pain, but from the overwhelming shock. The celestial being smiled gently as he withdrew the coal from Isaiah's lips. "Your guilt has been removed. Your sin is forgiven." Still stunned by the intensity of the moment, Isaiah slowly lifted his eyes to the glorious throne before him. He felt incredibly light, as if a crushing burden had been completely lifted from his heart. Then a powerful and profound voice resounded once again, this time with a clarity that could not be ignored. "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" The divine voice seemed to penetrate Isaiah's very bones, filling him with supernatural conviction. Without thinking of any future consequences, Isaiah responded immediately, his voice firm and resolute. "Here am I, Lord. Send me." But even as he spoke those words, a chill ran down his spine. Something inside him whispered clearly that his life would never be the same. He had no idea of the pain, rejection, and trials that still awaited him. The intense light slowly began to fade, and Isaiah realized that the vision was coming to an end. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a sudden wave of deep anguish washed over him. Something was still hidden, something he would have to carry for a long time. Just when he thought the experience was over, a new and terrifying image began to form slowly before his eyes. And when Isaiah thought he would die, something completely unexpected happened. The heat still burned on Isaiah's lips even after the celestial being had withdrawn with the burning coal. The sensation of fire remained, pulsing intensely. It was a pain mixed with a strange sense of relief, as if with every passing second, something impure was being torn from within him. Isaiah remained kneeling, eyes closed, breathing heavily. His body trembled. His hands resting on the cold temple floor could barely support his weight. It was as if he stood between life and death, between the human and the divine. A soft yet firm voice broke the silence. "Rise, Isaiah." He opened his eyes with effort. Before him, still hovering in the air, was the seraph who had touched his lips. The light surrounding him was less blinding now, but the glory of the place remained undeniable. "Your guilt has been removed," the celestial being repeated. "Your sin has been forgiven." Isaiah, his voice weak, asked, "Why? Why me? I am nothing more than a fragile man, a sinner." The seraph only smiled, as if the answer were too obvious to be spoken. Then the atmosphere began to vibrate once more. A voice more powerful, more majestic than any Isaiah had ever heard, echoed through the walls of the temple. "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah felt his heart stop for a moment. The question seemed to float in the air, awaiting a response, as if the universe itself waited on the decision of a single man. He looked around, as if searching for someone else who might take on such a responsibility. But the temple was empty save for the celestial beings and the overwhelming presence of God. I am here." His voice came out weak at first, but then gained strength as if a new vigor was rising from within. "Here am I, send me." The words left his lips before he could even reflect on the consequences. It was an impulse, a deep inner certainty, a response not born of the mind, but of the soul. For a brief moment, silence fell. Not even the seraphim sang. Only the sound of Isaiah's heavy breathing filled the air. Suddenly, the light around the throne grew brighter. It was as if heaven itself was responding to his answer. The celestial being before him drew closer once more, looking him in the eyes with a gaze that held both compassion and solemnity. "Then listen carefully, Isaiah," he said. "The path you have chosen will not be easy. Your words will be like hammers breaking stone, but they will strike hearts of stone. You will speak to the people, but they will shut their ears. You will prophesy, but they will not believe." Isaiah furrowed his brow, confused. "Lord, how long will this go on? Until when will they not listen?" The answer came like thunder rumbling through the temple walls. "Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are deserted and the fields desolate, until the Lord drives the people far away and the land is left utterly forsaken." Isaiah's blood ran cold. His hands began to tremble again. He sensed that the mission was far greater, far heavier than he had ever imagined. The celestial being then made a gesture toward him. "But Isaiah, even in the midst of destruction, a remnant will remain. A stump, a holy seed will survive." Isaiah took a deep breath, trying to absorb it all. He felt small, powerless, yet at the same time, a new fire began to burn in his chest, a fire that no rejection, no pain, and no future suffering could extinguish. Still on his knees, he closed his eyes for a moment, preparing himself spiritually for what was to come. When he opened his eyes again, the temple seemed to have returned to normal. There was no more smoke, no visible seraphim, no radiant light. But Isaiah knew his life would never be the same. He stood slowly, looking toward the altar with a mixture of awe and reverence. As he stepped out of the temple, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds as if the heavens were whispering to him, "This is only the beginning." Isaiah took a few steps outside and, looking toward the city, saw the people going about their routines, completely unaware of the supernatural experience he had just lived. Jeremiah, his friend, spotted him from afar and ran to him. "Isaiah, where were you? You look different." Isaiah, his eyes still glowing with emotion, simply smiled, took a deep breath, and replied, "Jeremiah, I believe God has given me a mission." Jeremiah stared at him, startled. "What kind of mission?" Isaiah looked to the horizon, his expression serious. "A mission that will hurt more than I can imagine." He answered without hesitation, unaware of just how painful his mission would truly be. Isaiah walked slowly through the streets of Jerusalem, feeling the weight of the mission he had just received. Each step seemed to carry the echo of the divine voice still ringing in his mind. "Go and tell this people." But what God had said afterward left the young prophet with a heavy heart. "Jeremiah," said Isaiah, calling out to his friend as he approached a small square where some men were arguing about politics and war, "I need to tell you something." Jeremiah turned quickly. "You're still not yourself, Isaiah. Ever since that morning in the temple, your eyes have changed. What happened?" Isaiah took a deep breath, as if drawing courage from the depths of his soul. "God called me," but he hesitated for a moment. "He also revealed to me that the people will not listen to me." "What do you mean?" asked Jeremiah, frowning. "God said they will have ears but not hear, eyes but not see. Their hearts will become hardened." Jeremiah fell silent for a few seconds, as if trying to process what he had just heard. "So you're saying God is sending you to preach, already knowing that no one will listen?" "Exactly," Isaiah replied, his gaze sorrowful. "My mission is to proclaim, Jeremiah, even if no one wants to hear." His friend ran a hand through his hair, confused. "That makes no sense, Isaiah. Why would God do that?" Isaiah sighed deeply. "Because even in the midst of rejection, there is a greater purpose. A remnant will be saved. A holy seed will remain." The two walked in silence until they reached the entrance of the marketplace. There Isaiah saw a group of religious leaders, the same ones he had seen many times in the temple. Approaching cautiously, Isaiah raised his voice. "O people of Jerusalem, thus says the Lord, listen closely, but do not understand. Look clearly, but do not perceive." Some men stopped to listen. Others simply shook their heads, laughing with disdain. "Another prophet with words of doom," one of them muttered. "We don't need prophets, we need soldiers," shouted another. Isaiah, his gaze fixed and full of determination, continued, Harden the hearts of this people, O Lord. Shut their ears, blind their eyes, until the cities lie in ruins, until the fields are laid waste. Silence fell over the square for a few seconds, but soon laughter and insults began again. "Go away, Isaiah," shouted an elderly man. "We don't need your threats." Jeremiah approached his friend, grabbing him by the arm. "Let's go, Isaiah." "They're not ready to listen." As they walked away, Isaiah suddenly stopped and looked back. Something inside him told him that this initial rejection was only the beginning of a long and painful road. That night, back in his small home, Isaiah knelt and prayed, "Lord, how long? How long must I preach and not be heard? How long must I watch my people drift further and further from you?" The answer came as a deep whisper in his mind. Until the land is devastated, until chaos covers the cities, until only a burned stump remains. But from that stump, life will rise again. Isaiah slowly opened his eyes, feeling a mix of fear and hope. Days later, the news began to arrive. Enemy troops advancing, hunger rising, injustice spreading in the streets. The words Isaiah had prophesied were beginning to come true before his very eyes. And still, the people remained indifferent. One morning, while passing through the marketplace, Isaiah heard a group of women weeping. Another village was destroyed, one of them lamented. Isaiah clenched his fists. They must hear. They must understand, he muttered to himself. Jeremiah appeared from around a corner. "Isaiah, are you going to keep going?" "Until my last breath," he answered, resolute. Isaiah knew his journey would be marked by pain, rejection, and solitude. But something inside him told him that God's purpose was greater than he could possibly understand at that moment. But the greatest revelation of all was still to come. The wind that rustled the palms outside Isaiah's window carried a restless chill, as though the city itself sensed the approach of another storm. Dawn's first light had barely touched the rooftops when heavy fists pounded on the prophet's door. Jeremiah burst in, eyes wide with urgency, cloak soaked from a sudden night rain. "Assyrian banners," he whispered, voice trembling. "They have crossed the northern plain again. Their host is like a sea of iron chariots, archers, siege towers rolling toward Lachish. King Hezekiah calls for you." Isaiah's pulse thundered. Only days earlier he had poured out visions of a servant who would one day carry the world's wounds. Yet here was a wound that threatened to tear Judah apart long before such hope arrived. He rose, gathered his worn mantle, and followed Jeremiah through still empty streets. Shutters slammed as messengers ran ahead shouting tidings of siege. Frightened mothers pulled children indoors. Merchants clutched ledgers that would soon be worthless if the gates fell. At the palace, torches guttered in a drafty corridor. Hezekiah paced barefoot on the cold stones, royal robes askew. The once energetic king now looked gaunt, eyes ringed with sleepless nights. He seized Isaiah by the sleeves. "They have written blasphemies," he said, thrusting a parchment forward. "Sennacherib boasts that no god of any nation has saved its people from his hand. He swears Jerusalem will drink the same cup." Isaiah unrolled the letter. Each inked threat felt like a claw dragging across sacred promises. Yet beneath the outrage, he sensed a quiet invitation from the Lord, a chance for Judah to witness that the Holy One's arm was not shortened. "Spread it out before the altar," he told the king. "Let every boast lie in the presence of the one they mock. Tonight we will plead our cause where true power dwells." That evening, as twilight bled into the sanctuary, Hezekiah laid the scroll upon golden boards, still bearing the scent of frankincense. Isaiah knelt beside him. Words failed at first. Only groans escaped, mingling with the eerie hiss of distant battering rams echoing beyond the western hills. At last Isaiah's voice steadied, and he prayed aloud, "O Lord of hosts, maker of heaven and earth, you alone are God over all kingdoms. Hear the insults hurled at you. Save us not for our glory, but so that every nation may know your name." A hush followed so complete that the crackle of lampwicks seemed thunderous. Then a certainty as clear as the sunrise the prophet had not yet seen flooded his spirit. The Assyrian horde would soon flee, felled not by sword or shield, but by an unseen hand. He rose and placed a calming palm on the king's shoulder. "They will not enter this city," he declared. "An army you cannot see will fight for you. Before another night passes, their general will return by the very road he came." Hezekiah's eyes brimmed. "But their camp is as vast as sand," he whispered. "Yet grains of sand scatter before a single breath of God," Isaiah answered. Moonlight found its path through a high lattice as the two men parted. Outside the walls, Assyrian commanders reveled in easy victory. They sharpened blades, mapped out breaches, and mocked Jerusalem's silent battlements. No sentinel within could have guessed what stalked the invaders' tents, a presence swift as lightning, dreadful as midnight thunder. In the deep watches before dawn, Isaiah woke to frantic bell clangs. Over the rooftops rose a cry of such astonishment that even children forgotten in sleep sat upright. Jeremiah burst in again, but this time awe eclipsed fear. "They are gone," he gasped. "All through the valley of Rephaim their dead lie like withered grass. Not an arrow was loosed from our walls. They simply died." Isaiah hurried to the ramparts. Beyond the gate, vultures circled over thousands of lifeless forms. Abandoned shields flashed dull silver in sunrise. Survivors had fled south, leaving war engines smoldering behind. No one could explain what had slain so many seasoned soldiers in a single night, yet whispers spread that an angel of the Lord had passed through the camp. The prophet bowed his head. The city erupted in stunned rejoicing, but Isaiah's joy was tempered, a reminder that present deliverance, though miraculous, was only a faint portrait of the greater salvation God was weaving through centuries. Days later, unlooked-for news reached the palace. Hezekiah, struck by a sudden illness, lay fevered and near death. Isaiah went to the royal bedchamber, where the air reeked of myrrh and damp linens. The king's breathing rattled. Cheeks burned red against sweat-drenched pillows. Isaiah's heart sank. Had Jerusalem survived spears only to lose its shepherd to disease? He knelt and spoke softly. "Set your house in order, for the Lord says you will not recover." The words felt like ice, yet obedience compelled him. He left, throat tight with grief. Barely had he reached the courtyard when a tremor of divine urgency halted his steps. A new word pierced his heart. The decree had shifted. "Return," the Lord whispered. "Tell him I have heard his tears. I will add 15 years to his life and defend this city once more." Isaiah hurried back. Tears streamed down Hezekiah's face as the prophet pressed a cool fig poultice against the inflamed boil on his side. "Within 3 days you will stand in the temple," Isaiah said. "And as a sign, the shadow on the steps of Ahaz will move backward 10 degrees. Servants raced outside. Moments later, astonished cries echoed through marble halls. The afternoon sun's shadow had indeed reversed, strolling up the stairway as though time itself obeyed the word of the Holy One. The miracle spread beyond borders, capturing the attention of Babylonia. Envoys arrived bearing exotic spices and polished stones, eager to learn of the God who altered shadows. Hezekiah, flattered, unveiled treasury vaults laden with silver, gold, and armory. When Isaiah learned of this boastful display, his spirit grew heavy. "What have they seen in your house?" he asked the king. "Everything," Hezekiah answered without shame. "There is nothing I withheld." Isaiah's eyes clouded. He foresaw gleaming Babylonian chariots returning, not with gifts but chains, carting away these treasures, and even royal sons. Sorrow etched lines deeper across his brow. How swiftly human hearts bloomed with pride and borrowed blessings. That night he wandered alone along the outer wall, where the scent of scorched siege towers still lingered. Stars glittered cold above, indifferent to mortal triumphs. Isaiah pressed a hand to the stones and whispered, "We survive wars, yet stumble over vanity. How blind we are, Lord." A gentle rustle answered, like a mother's hush to a restless child. Memory of the servant rose again, the one who would refuse earthly splendor, whose strength would be measured not by gold or armies, but by surrendered blood. Compared to that future king, every throne of men felt like dust. Weeks passed, and although peace held, unease simmered beneath the surface. Merchants argued over inflated grain prices. Judges accepted bribes as casually as bread. The temple echoed with hollow songs, while arrogant priests paraded jeweled vestments. One morning Isaiah took a piece of coarse sackcloth, tied it around his waist, and walked the main avenue barefoot. Children giggled, soldiers frowned, but he spoke with calm gravity. "As I walk stripped of comfort, so will Egypt and Cush be led away by the king of Assyria, barefoot and humiliated. Trust in alliances will leave you naked." Mockery followed him like a swarm of flies. Yet a few thoughtful faces lingered at corners, recognizing truth in the strange procession. Among them was a young scribe named Micah, eyes alight with conviction. He began taking down Isaiah's words, preserving them on fresh parchment. Though still unaware, he would carry that testimony into the next generation. That evening, Jeremiah found Isaiah washing dust from cracked heels. "Will you ever rest?" he asked. "Not until hearts awaken," Isaiah answered. "If a sign of shame will spare them deeper shame later, let mine be the reminder." He reached for the scrolls where earlier visions lay. Some held scenes of fields reborn and nations streaming to a mountain of peace. Others dripped with wrath like bitter wine. Yet woven through every line was a melody only faith could hear, the promise of Emmanuel, the child who would be God with us, the servant who would bear grief, the king whose kingdom would eclipse all empires. Isaiah dipped his quill and wrote again, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, for his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, his ways beyond our ways." Outside, thunder rumbled over the hills, though no rain yet fell. He knew more storms would come, Babylonian fires, exiles, centuries of silence. But he also knew a dawn greater than any siege would follow. Its light birthed from a borrowed tomb. He set down the quill. Candlelight flickered across his tired face. Folding his hands, Isaiah whispered into the stillness, "Even if my generation closes its ears, somewhere in ages yet unborn a hungry heart will read these words and discover hope. For your word, O Lord, is life to the weary and an anchor for all time." And with that quiet prayer, the prophet extinguished the lamp, trusting the darkness itself to carry the echo of a coming light. The years that followed the miraculous deliverance from Assyria brought an unexpected burden to Isaiah's shoulders, the weight of witnessing a people who grew comfortable in their salvation. Where once terror had driven men to their knees in prayer, now prosperity bred a dangerous forgetfulness. The prophet walked through Jerusalem's bustling markets, observing merchants who haggled over prices, while temple sacrifices burned unattended, their smoke rising like empty gestures toward an increasingly distant heaven. Isaiah paused beside a fountain where women gathered to draw water and exchange gossip. Their laughter echoed off stone walls, carefree and bright, yet beneath their joy he sensed a hollowness that made his heart ache. They spoke of new silks from distant lands, of festivals planned for the coming season, of marriages and births, saw the beautiful rhythms of mortal life. But when had any of them last spoken of the Lord who had saved their city from destruction? A young mother bounced her infant son on her knee while chatting with friends. The child's eyes sparkled with innocent wonder, and for a moment Isaiah saw in that small face an echo of the promised child he had prophesied years before, the one who would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The vision stirred something deep within his chest, a longing so intense it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "Madam," he said gently, approaching the group, "that beautiful child of yours, do you know the Lord has plans for the children of Israel that stretch beyond the stars?" The women turned, recognizing the prophet. Some smiled politely, while others shifted uncomfortably. The young mother pulled her baby closer. "Isaiah," she said with forced courtesy, "we are grateful for your prayers during the siege. But surely now is a time for celebration, not prophecy." "Every breath is a time for prophecy," he replied softly. "For in each moment we choose whether to remember or forget the one who gives us life." An older woman frowned. "Must you always speak of such heavy things? Can we not simply enjoy the peace we have been given?" Isaiah's gaze grew distant. "Peace without righteousness is like a house built on sand, dear woman. When the storms come, and they will come, what foundation will remain?" The group fell silent, their earlier joy dampened. One by one they gathered their water jars and departed, leaving Isaiah alone beside the fountain. He knelt and cupped the cool water in his palms, watching it slip through his fingers like the very years of his ministry. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the temple courtyard, Isaiah climbed to a high place overlooking the city. Jerusalem spread below him like a jewel, its white limestone walls glowing amber in the sunset. Yet his prophetic vision pierced beyond the surface beauty to see what lay ahead: flames consuming those very walls, treasures carried away in Babylonian carts, children born free who would grow up in chains. Jeremiah found him there as the first stars appeared. His old friend's hair had grown gray over the years, and lines mapped the journey of shared sorrows across his weathered face. "You look as though you carry the weight of the world," Jeremiah observed, settling beside him on the stone ledge. "Perhaps I do," Isaiah replied. "The Lord has shown me visions of days when this city will lie in ruins, when the temple will be stripped bare, when our people will walk in chains toward a distant land. Yet he has also shown me something beyond that darkness, a light so brilliant that it will illuminate nations yet unborn." Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment. "How do you bear it, my friend, seeing both the agony and the glory?" Isaiah turned to face him, and in the prophet's eyes burned a fire that no amount of rejection or sorrow could extinguish. "Because between the agony and the glory stands a figure I can barely comprehend, one who will take upon himself all the pain I foresee, all the rebellion of our people, all the weight of human sin. He will be despised and rejected, a man of sorrows acquainted with grief. Yet through his wounds will come healing for the nations." As if summoned by those words, a vision began to unfold before Isaiah's inner sight. He saw a servant, beaten beyond recognition, standing silent before his accusers. He witnessed a cross raised against a darkened sky, and a voice crying, "It is finished," that would echo through eternity. He beheld a tomb, empty and radiant with resurrection life. Tears streamed down the prophet's face as he glimpsed the cosmic exchange, the sinless one bearing sin, the Prince of Peace making peace through his blood. "Isaiah?" Jeremiah's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you well?" The prophet blinked, returning to the present moment. "I have seen him again," he whispered, "the one who will save not just Israel, but the whole world." "Jeremiah, how can I describe such glory wrapped in such suffering?" Over the following months, Isaiah found himself drawn repeatedly to his writing table, struggling to capture in human words the divine revelations that burned within his spirit. His quill moved across parchment with urgency, as if he raced against time itself to preserve what God had shown him for generations yet unborn. "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows," he wrote, pausing to wipe tears that blurred his vision. "Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed." The words felt inadequate, like trying to hold ocean depths in a clay cup. How could mere language contain the mystery of divine love descending to human flesh? How could ink and parchment bear the weight of cosmic redemption? News came that King Hezekiah's son Manasseh was showing troubling signs even in his youth. A fascination with foreign gods, a cruelty toward servants, a mocking attitude toward the temple priests. Isaiah's heart grew heavy as he realized that the righteous king's heir might undo everything his father had built. One crisp morning, Isaiah made his way to the palace to speak with Hezekiah. He found the king in his private chambers, studying trade agreements with Phoenician merchants. Age had carved deeper lines around the ruler's eyes, and his movements carried the careful deliberation of a man who had looked death in the face and returned. "My lord," Isaiah said, bowing respectfully, "I must speak with you about your son." Hezekiah's expression darkened. "Manasseh is young. He will learn wisdom in time." "Will he?" Isaiah asked gently. "Or will the seeds of rebellion already planted in his heart grow into thorns that choke the life from Judah?" The king set down his scrolls with a heavy sigh. "What would you have me do, prophet? Chain my own son? Force him to love the Lord?" "Love cannot be forced," Isaiah agreed, "but boundaries can be set. Consequences can be established. The future of your kingdom may hang on decisions you make today." Hezekiah stood and walked to a window overlooking the Temple Mount. "I have tried, Isaiah. I have shown him the treasures preserved from the Assyrian siege, reminded him of the miracles we witnessed. Yet he looks at me as if I speak of children's tales." Isaiah joined him at the window. Below them, priests moved through their daily rituals, offering incense and sacrifice according to ancient patterns. Yet even from this distance, the prophet could sense the mechanical nature of their worship form without power, tradition without transformation. "Perhaps," Isaiah said slowly, "Manasseh sees in our religion only empty ritual, because that is what it has become for many. When did you last hear a priest speak with the fire of true encounter? When did a Levite last tremble at the holiness of the God he serves?" The observation struck home. Hezekiah's shoulders sagged as he contemplated the gradual erosion of spiritual vitality that had occurred even within the temple walls. "Then what hope remains?" the king asked. "If even our priests have grown cold, if my own son rejects the faith of his fathers, what future awaits us?" Isaiah placed a hand on the king's shoulder. "Hope remains because God's promises do not depend on human faithfulness. Though we fail, though nations rise and fall, though temples crumble and kingdoms fade, his word endures forever. The child I prophesied will come. The servant I have seen in vision will accomplish his work. Light will pierce the darkness, no matter how deep it grows." That afternoon, Isaiah walked alone through the cemetery where generations of Judah's kings lay buried. He paused before the tomb of David, remembering the psalms that still echoed in temple worship, words of a shepherd king who had known both triumph and failure, glory and shame, yet had clung to faith through every storm. "Your greater son is coming," he whispered to the silent stone, "one who will sit on your throne forever, whose kingdom will have no end." A gentle breeze stirred the olive trees overhead, and for a moment Isaiah could almost hear distant music, the sound of angels announcing a birth in Bethlehem, of shepherds running to find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, of wise men offering gifts to the King of Kings. The vision filled him with such joy that he laughed aloud, startling a pair of doves into flight. As evening approached, Isaiah returned to his modest dwelling. The smell of bread baking in neighboring homes reminded him of life's simple pleasures, the daily mercies that sustained human existence, even in times of spiritual drought. He lit a small oil lamp and opened his writing materials once more. "For unto us a child is born," he wrote, the words flowing like water from a spring. "Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. The lamp flickered as night settled over Jerusalem, but Isaiah continued writing, driven by an urgency he could not fully explain. Somewhere in the darkness beyond his window, he sensed the approach of difficult days, years, when his words would be forgotten, when false prophets would multiply like weeds, when the people would chase after empty promises and worthless gods. Yet he also sensed something else moving through the shadows of history, a purpose so magnificent, so carefully orchestrated, that it would transform even the darkest moments into stepping stones toward ultimate redemption. The very sufferings he foresaw would become the soil in which hope would grow. The exile he prophesied would lead to restoration. The death he witnessed in vision would blossom into eternal life. With tears of both sorrow and joy streaming down his weathered face, Isaiah rode on into the night, preserving for future generations the light that no darkness could overcome. Dawn broke gray and mournful over Jerusalem, casting long shadows that seemed to prophesy the darkness Isaiah increasingly felt descending upon his beloved city. The prophet had spent the night in prayer and writing, his aged hands trembling not from weakness, but from the intensity of the visions that continued to pour through him like a rushing river. At 73 years old, his beard had turned white as snow, yet his eyes still burned with the fire he had first encountered in the temple so many decades ago. The sound of weeping drew him from his chamber. In the street below, a group of women mourned loudly, tearing their garments and throwing dust upon their heads. Isaiah descended quickly, his heart heavy with foreboding. "What has happened?" he asked an elderly man who stood watching the scene with grim resignation. "Another village burned," the man replied without looking at him. "The Babylonians grow bolder with each passing season. They say King Manasseh has invited their astrologers into the palace itself, seeking guidance from their gods." Isaiah closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache of a heart that had carried the burden of unwelcome truth for so long. The prophecies he had spoken years earlier were unfolding like a scroll written in blood and tears. Manasseh had indeed proven even worse than Isaiah had feared, filling Jerusalem with innocent blood and leading the nation into depths of idolatry that made his grandfather, Ahaz, seem righteous by comparison. And what does our king say to comfort the people? Isaiah asked, though he dreaded the answer. The old man spat into the dust. Comfort? He speaks only of new alliances, of paying tribute to keep the wolves at bay. Yesterday he commanded that Molech's altar be rebuilt in the valley of Hinnom, they say. They say he has offered his own son to the flames. The words hit Isaiah like physical blows. He staggered backward, his hand clutching at the wall for support. The image of innocent children being sacrificed to satisfy demonic appetites filled his mind with such horror that he thought he might be sick. This was the depth to which God's chosen people had fallen, offering their own offspring to false gods while abandoning the one who had delivered them from Egypt, from Assyria, from countless enemies throughout their history. "Jeremiah," he whispered, calling to his lifelong friend who had appeared at his side. "How can the Lord bear to look upon such abominations? How can his justice delay any longer?" Jeremiah, now stooped with age but still steady in spirit, took Isaiah's arm. "Come, my friend. Let us walk where the air is cleaner and perhaps hear what the Lord would say in this dark hour." They made their way through the increasingly crowded streets, past merchants selling amulets blessed by foreign priests, past corners where temple prostitutes plied their trade in broad daylight, past children who played games mimicking the rituals they had witnessed on pagan altars. Each sight drove the knife of grief deeper into Isaiah's heart. At the city's eastern gate, they climbed a hill that offered a view of the Mount of Olives. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, creating a deceptive beauty that masked the spiritual corruption festering below. Isaiah sank to his knees on the rocky ground, his face turned toward heaven. "Speak, Lord," he pleaded. "Your servant listens, though each word you give me feels like fire in my bones." The familiar presence descended upon him like a gentle wind that carried within it the force of a hurricane. Images began to flood his consciousness, not of immediate judgment, though that would surely come, but of something far more mysterious and wonderful. He saw centuries stretching ahead like an endless desert, punctuated by oases of hope. He witnessed empires rising and falling like waves upon a shore. Yet through it all, a golden thread of divine purpose weaving an intricate pattern. "Write," the voice commanded. "Write for those who will come after, when the temple lies in ruins and the people sit by foreign rivers weeping for what they have lost." Isaiah's hands moved across the parchment with supernatural speed, capturing visions that seemed to come from beyond time itself. He saw a highway in the desert, straight and smooth, prepared for the coming of the Lord. He witnessed valleys being lifted up and mountains made low, rough places becoming plain, as all flesh together beheld the glory of God. "The voice of one crying in the wilderness," he wrote, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God." A vision shifted, and he saw a figure emerging from the wilderness, wild-haired and clothed in camel skin, eating locusts and honey, his voice thundering across the Jordan River. "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." This herald, this forerunner, would prepare hearts for the coming of one whose sandals he was not worthy to untie. Who is this? Isaiah gasped, though part of him already knew. The scene transformed again, and he beheld the one he had seen so many times before, the suffering servant, the child born to them, the Prince of Peace. But now the vision was more vivid than ever before. He watched as this mysterious figure walked among the people, healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, raising the dead, speaking words that carried the very authority of heaven. Yet even as crowds followed him with desperate hope, Isaiah saw the religious leaders plotting in shadowed corners. He witnessed the kiss of betrayal in a moonlit garden, the mockery of a trial where truth itself stood accused, the Via Dolorosa where the Son of God stumbled beneath the weight of a Roman cross. "He was oppressed and he was afflicted," Isaiah wrote, his quill barely able to keep pace with the torrent of revelation. "Yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth." The crucifixion scene unfolded before his spiritual eyes with such clarity that he could smell the blood, hear the hammering of nails, feel the darkness that covered the earth as the light of the world was extinguished. He saw the servant's face, marred beyond recognition, yet radiating a love so pure that it transformed even suffering into beauty. "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows," the prophet continued, weeping openly now. "Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed." Jeremiah watched in awe as his friend transcribed visions that seemed to bridge earth and heaven. The old scribe had witnessed Isaiah's prophetic trances many times over the decades, but never had he seen such intensity, such obvious communion with the divine mind. The vision continued, showing Isaiah not just the death, but the victory that would follow. He saw the servant's grave with the rich, his resurrection morning, when death itself would be conquered, his ascension to the right hand of the Father, where he would intercede for those who had crucified him. "When you make his soul an offering for sin," Isaiah wrote, marveling at the paradox, "he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul, and be satisfied." The implications staggered him. The servant would die, yet live forever. He would be cut off from the land of the living, yet see his offspring multiply beyond number. He would be rejected by his own people, yet become a light to the Gentiles, bringing salvation to the ends of the earth. As the vision faded, Isaiah found himself back on the hillside with Jeremiah, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parchment, covered with his prophecies. His entire body ached as though he had been physically present at the scenes he had witnessed. "What did you see?" Jeremiah asked softly. Isaiah looked at his friend with eyes that seemed to hold depths of eternity. "I saw the answer to every question we have ever asked about suffering, about justice, about God's love. I saw how the worst evil that human hearts could devise would become the instrument of the greatest good the universe has ever known." He struggled to his feet, joints protesting after hours of kneeling on the hard ground. "Jeremiah, dark days are coming for our nation, darker than we can imagine. The temple will be destroyed, the people carried away, the promised land left desolate. But I have seen beyond the darkness to a light that will never be extinguished." As they walked back toward the city, Isaiah's step was lighter despite his physical exhaustion. The burden of prophecy remained, but it was now balanced by a joy that transcended present circumstances. He had been privileged to see the end from the beginning, to understand that every tear would be wiped away, every wrong made right, every broken heart healed by the one who would willingly break his own. That evening, as he sat in his simple dwelling transcribing the day's revelations, Isaiah paused to reflect on the mystery he had been chosen to unfold. How could he make his generation understand that their present rebellion was not the end of the story, but merely a dark chapter in a narrative that would culminate in unimaginable glory? He dipped his quill again and wrote, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Outside his window, the sounds of a city given over to wickedness continued drunken laughter from pagan festivals, the cries of children being offered to Moloch, the chanting of false priests. Yet Isaiah smiled as he wrote, knowing that above all the noise of human rebellion, the voice of divine love was composing a symphony that would one day fill the earth with righteousness as the waters cover the sea. The old prophet worked late into the night, preserving for future generations the visions that burned within his spirit like stars in the darkness. Though his own people would not listen, though judgment was certain and exile inevitable, he wrote with the confidence of one who had seen the morning beyond the night. And in the margins of his prophecies, almost as an afterthought, he added words that would puzzle readers for centuries. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us." The lamplight flickered as he set down his quill, but the words he had written would burn brightly through the darkest centuries ahead, kindling hope in hearts that had forgotten how to dream of redemption. The final years of Isaiah's earthly ministry unfolded like the closing chapters of a sacred scroll. Each day waited with the knowledge that his voice would soon be silenced, yet his words would echo through the corridors of eternity. At 81 years old, the prophet's body bore the marks of decades spent wrestling with divine visions and human rejection. But his spirit burned brighter than ever with the fire of prophetic calling. King Manasseh's reign had plunged Judah into spiritual darkness, so complete that even the memory of his father Hezekiah's righteousness seemed like a distant dream. The streets of Jerusalem reeked with the smoke of incense offered to foreign gods, while the cries of children sacrificed to Moloch haunted the night air. Isaiah walked through this moral wasteland like a man carrying light in his hands, though few desired the illumination he offered. On a morning when the sky hung heavy with storm clouds, Isaiah made his way to the temple courts where he had first encountered the Holy One so many years before. The sacred precincts that had once thrummed with divine presence now felt hollow, defiled by priests who served for profit and worshippers who brought offerings with hearts far from God. He found a quiet corner where he could kneel and pray, his weathered hands spread upon the cold stone floor. "Lord," he whispered, How long until your people remember who they are? How long until they turn from these abominations and seek your face? The answer came not in words, but in a vision that swept over him like a mighty wind. He saw Jerusalem surrounded by enemies, its walls broken down, its temple consumed by flames. He witnessed long lines of captives trudging eastward toward Babylon, carrying nothing but their grief and the bitter knowledge of opportunities squandered. Yet beyond the devastation, his prophetic sight penetrated to glimpse restoration. He saw the exiles by the rivers of Babylon, weeping as they remembered Zion, their hearts finally broken of the pride that had led them astray. He witnessed a remnant returning, sadder but wiser, ready to rebuild not just walls and buildings, but their covenant relationship with the Almighty. "Comfort, comfort my people," came the divine voice, gentle yet commanding. "Speak comfort to Jerusalem, and cry out to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned. For she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." Isaiah's eyes filled with tears as he recognized this as perhaps his final major prophecy. After decades of pronouncing judgment, he was being called to speak of consolation, to offer hope to a people who would not understand its value until they had lost everything they thought mattered. He rose slowly, his joints protesting, and made his way home through streets where merchants hawked idols alongside bread, where children played games that mimicked pagan rituals, where the very air seemed thick with spiritual corruption. Yet now he saw it all through eyes of compassion rather than condemnation, understanding that even this darkness served a purpose in God's grand design. In his modest dwelling, Isaiah took up his quill and began to write what would become his most beloved words. "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem, and cry out to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned." As he wrote, another vision unfolded more glorious than any he had seen before. He beheld the return of the Lord to Zion, not as a conquering warrior, but as a shepherd gathering his scattered flock. The imagery was so tender it made his heart ache with longing. "He will feed his flock like a shepherd," he wrote, tears blurring his vision. "He will gather the lambs with his arm, and carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those who are with young." The prophecy continued to flow through him like a river of living water. He saw the servant once more, but now not only as the suffering substitute, but as the victorious king who would establish justice in the earth. Islands would wait for his law, and nations would walk in his light. "Behold my servant whom I uphold," he transcribed, marveling at the dual nature of this mysterious figure. "My elect one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles." Days blended into weeks as Isaiah poured his remaining strength into capturing these final revelations. He wrote of new heavens and a new earth where righteousness would dwell, of a city whose gates would never be shut, of a time when sorrow and sighing would flee away forever. Jeremiah, now bent with age but still faithful, brought him meals and tended to his needs as the prophet wrote with feverish intensity. "My friend," he said one evening, "you have given your entire life to this calling. Surely you can rest now." Isaiah looked up from his parchment, his eyes bright despite his exhaustion. "How can I rest when I see such glory ahead? Jeremiah, we are living in the darkness before the dawn. Yes, judgment is coming, terrible judgment that will shake the foundations of our world. But beyond that judgment lies redemption so magnificent that it will make every tear worthwhile." He gestured to the scrolls that filled his chamber. "These words are not for our generation alone. They are for a people yet unborn, for hearts that will hunger for hope in days darker than ours, for souls who will need to know that God has not forgotten his promises." One morning, Jeremiah found Isaiah collapsed at his writing table, the quill still clutched in his fingers, a half-finished sentence trailing across the parchment. The old prophet's breathing was shallow, his skin pale as moonlight, yet his lips moved in silent prayer. "Isaiah," Jeremiah whispered, kneeling beside his lifelong friend. "Can you hear me?" The prophet's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort on the familiar face above him. "Jeremiah," he breathed, "have I finished? Have I written everything the Lord commanded?" Jeremiah's throat tightened as he looked at the countless scrolls surrounding them, prophecies that spanned from the immediate future to the end of time itself, visions of judgment and redemption, woven together in a tapestry of divine purpose. "You have been faithful," he assured his friend, "more faithful than any man deserves to be." Isaiah struggled to sit up, his gaze turning toward the window where dawn was breaking over Jerusalem. "I see him," he whispered with wonder. "I see the child who will be born, the servant who will suffer, the king who will reign. Jeremiah, he is coming. Not in my lifetime, perhaps not in yours, but he is coming as surely as the sun rises." His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if the vision itself lent him strength. "Tell them, when the darkness falls and the temple burns and the people are carried away, tell them that this is not the end. Tell them that God is weaving all things together for good, that every tear will be remembered, every prayer will be answered, every broken heart will be healed." Through the window, they could hear the sounds of the city awakening, merchants setting up their stalls, children running through the streets, the daily rhythms of life continuing as if nothing had changed. Yet Isaiah knew that epochal changes lay just beyond the horizon, transformations that would reshape not just Israel, but all of human history. "Promise me," he said, gripping Jeremiah's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you will preserve these words. They are not mine but his, and they will be needed when hope seems lost and faith appears foolish." Jeremiah nodded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I promise, my friend, your words will outlive empires." Isaiah smiled then, a radiance suffusing his features that seemed to echo the glory he had witnessed in the temple so many decades before. "Then I am content. I have seen his salvation from afar, and it is more beautiful than any human heart could imagine." As the sun climbed higher over Jerusalem, painting the limestone walls in shades of gold and amber, Isaiah closed his eyes and breathed his last. His final words were barely audible, a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime spent in service to the Eternal. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Jeremiah sat in silence for a long time, holding the hand of the man who had been prophet, teacher, and friend. Around them, the scrolls that contained Isaiah's life work rustled in the morning breeze, prophecies that would comfort exiles in Babylon, inspire builders in the time of restoration, and ultimately find their perfect fulfillment in a stable in Bethlehem and on a hill called Calvary. Outside, Jerusalem continued its descent into the darkness that Isaiah had foretold. Within months, Babylonian armies would begin their final siege. The temple would burn, the walls would crumble, and the people would learn in bitter exile the cost of forgetting their God. Yet tucked away in careful hands, preserved through conquest and captivity, carried by faithful scribes across deserts and through decades, Isaiah's words would survive. They would be copied and recopied, studied and memorized, cherished by generations who found in them not just ancient history, but living hope. Centuries later, in a synagogue in Nazareth, a young carpenter would stand and read from Isaiah's scroll, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." And closing the book, he would declare with quiet authority, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." The prophet who had seen from afar would finally find his visions made flesh, his prophecies transformed from ink on parchment to blood and breath and beating heart. The child would be born, the servant would suffer, the king would reign, and the glory of the Lord would cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. In death as in life, Isaiah had spoken not just to his own generation, but to every soul who would ever hunger for redemption, thirst for righteousness, or dare to believe that love could triumph over evil, light over darkness, and life over death. His words had become a bridge spanning the centuries, connecting the ancient world to the eternal, the temporal to the divine. And so the prophet's work was complete, though its impact would ripple through time until the day when every knee would bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The very consummation that Isaiah had glimpsed through tears of joy on that first transformative day in the temple, when the seraphim sang, and the coal touched his lips, and his life was forever changed by an encounter with the Holy One of Israel.